Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm Greg Nettle, and I have the privilege of serving as president of Stadia Church Planting, where we help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches. Well, I have one of my very best friends on the podcast, Ben Cachiaras. Ben and I have been friends for a couple decades, and I've watched him develop leaders throughout the United States and honestly all over the world. He's one of the best leadership development gurus that I know of. He leads Mountain Christian Church in the Baltimore, Maryland area, multiple campuses. Mountain Christian has grown under his leadership to be a thriving giga church. But most importantly, Ben is an incredible man of character who pours into leaders all around him, develops elders as good as anyone I've ever met. Really excited to have my friend Ben Cachiaras on this edition of the Church Planting Podcast. So we're talking about leadership development on this episode of the Church Planting Podcast. And when we were thinking about who to have on for leadership development, the very first person that came to mind was just a very dear, dear friend of mine, Ben Cachiaras, senior leader at Mountain Christian Church for a lot of years. But I know Ben intimately, and I know how he leads, not just at Mountain, but at a national and even a global level. But what I've been so impressed about with over the years with Ben is the number of leaders that are coming out of his boat wake, if you will. And Ben's a big boater. We can talk about that. But, you can tell a boat by the wake it leaves behind. And what I'm watching in Ben's wake are all of these amazing leaders coming up out of his leadership. Ben Cachiaras, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
Hey, Greg, it's great to be with you and the people who have a habit of listening to this really cool podcast you've got going. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, Ben, let's just get to it. Leadership development, my goodness, I've watched you with leadership development in your church and how you've raised up leaders within the church in volunteer roles, to staff roles, to elders and so forth. I've watched you raise up leaders to send out very open-handedly to plant new churches and lead other organizations. You've been instrumental in developing me as a leader at a personal level in a very deep way, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Let's start off with, though, we've got lots of church planters, church multipliers. Let's start off with eldership or whatever their governing body is, because not every church has a governing body, but let's talk about the senior leadership, unpaid, if you will, in your church. What do you do? How are you? Because you've done that for years.
Yeah, boy, I think it's, I'm surprised you start there, but I think it's perfect to start there because, just look at it simply. The church is the hope of the world, and the church can rise no higher than its leaders. And so whatever leadership you've got at the top of your organization, whether you call them shepherds, elders, board, or a ministry team or a directional team, whatever, who's on that team and how they function is going to shape not only the personality of your church or your organization, it's going to be the lift and determine how high it rises, or the lid to determine how high it doesn't rise.
And it's going to determine how effective you're going to be as a leader personally as well. Okay, so what do you do? I've watched you intentionally develop. So what are some practical things you do to develop that level of leadership?
Well, I'll say there are some things that we have. I feel like we've had a few different seasons of Mountain and eldership, and there's a couple of rough seasons that taught me a lot. 15, 20 years ago, it was like, when it's not well with that group, you're like, man, I don't care how well it's going. No matter how many baptisms you got, everything's up and to the right. If you got trouble with your wife or that board, you're done. Right. You're like, I hate this. I'm Elijah out looking for a broom tree to get under and die. But likewise, when that team is solid and with you, it doesn't matter if you've had a bad week or a bad sermon or the numbers are down and you're together there, you're going to be okay. So what you're asking is so crucial. And I think one of the things I learned a long time ago is, whereas I would probably counter this advice if you were asking me like, hey, how do we find and deploy leaders in the church at a small group level or even certain staff roles, I would say, don't be afraid to take a chance on somebody. I mean, good grief, look at Jesus. Yeah. He's like, don't take a credit card, don't prepare, just go, you're ready. And they're like, what? He sends out 72. The disciples, unschooled, clearly not prepared well. And he's like, you've got what it takes, let's go. contrary to that, I think as you look at, we're looking more now, and when you talk about eldership or a team, I think you're looking more like what Paul is talking about later on in the development of the church, where you find the pastoral epistles. There's like a higher bar now. It's like not, so I think that's the first thing I would say is don't take a chance on an elder or a shepherd. Don't take a chance.
Okay.
Like, yeah, this person is coming along. I think if we maybe gave him this role, it would really be good for him. It's like, nope, stop. There's other roles to do that with, and that's a great process. But I think that's the smartest thing is to realize as this team goes, so goes the church and my health and everything with it. So don't take a chance on an elder. Don't take take a chance on lots of other roles. But the higher up the chart, so to speak, the less risk you're going to take, which means you've got to ascertain. That's why Paul gives this sort of list of like, it should be this. So that's number one. And I'll say that, for me, we've kind of developed a team. We call it the two-winged bird that will fly. So if you think of, if I could draw, I would draw for you right now, like a bird, a body of a bird with two wings. And each wing is important. The body of the bird is the mission itself. That's what's going to move this church forward. And so the two wings that you want on your elder team or your shepherd team are the relational wing and the personal wing. The personal wing is saying, you as a person, whoever this is, has to be personally connected with Jesus, hearing from the Spirit of God, mature, not looking to this group. There it is. There you go, everyone. Perfect. Greg's
I drew it.
You're not looking to this group to be your spiritual feeder. You're coming to the table tuned into the Spirit of God. Because if you're not, you're going to take us sideways. So personally, we've got to do things. You've got to make sure that wing is flapping. But then relationally, I have found that we have to invest probably a lot more relationally with each other in that room than I think a lot of lead pastors and others in church planners sometimes want to or feel like they have time to. It feels like, I can't, we need to be able to get on, just maybe have a couple meetings and do business. And I just have found, and Greg, I've watched you do this well, where the relational, greasing those relational skids, we serve a relational God, Father, Son, Spirit, a community invites us in, all of that. We know this stuff, and yet we sometimes try to run a board like a board. You don't find boards in the Bible. You find teams of people. The Ephesian elders heard Paul was coming by. They walk how many miles from Miletus in the middle of the night to hug his neck like schoolgirls. They're crying, when they have to leave. I may not see each other again. Every leader I know would kill for an eldership that thinks of them that way. And that's relational investment. Okay.
So we got the personal investment, the relational. What about competency? I mean, how are you developing people? I mean, leadership is hard, and especially leadership of a nonprofit and specifically the church.
Yeah, it does matter, doesn't it? And I think it kind of helps to think of what do we need this team to do? And once we can identify like where in your governance structure, is this a nuts and bolts team? Are they down in the trenches? Are they vision? Are they strategy? What is the win? How will we know if this team succeeded? At the end of a year, was this a good board or a bad one? You have to know what the outcomes are. Once you do, you can then go and say, who do we need on this team? What kind of gifts and skill sets do we need? And so we probably need, in ours, we have elders are at the top of our leadership pipeline, if you will, which means they're responsible for vision, not strategy, really, not really hiring. You don't have to be great at hiring or firing or personnel decisions. And so it changes. Back in the day, we needed people who were like real process oriented and were good implementers. Now those people are like always gritting their teeth because they don't get to do that if you're an elder at our church. You're up here working on vision. So we're looking for someone with some financial savvy, some entrepreneurial skills, some vision, someone who's a person who can kind of mind the store with not getting us too carried away with, crazy vision. So you're looking for like, what do we need on the team to accomplish those objectives? And I think that really, really helps. And then, so then you're building a team intentionally around the gifts that you're looking for.
Okay, but I've been with you, and we're trying to get dates on a calendar to get together. And I just remember all these years when you're going, oh, but wait, I've got to be back on Tuesday night because I've got this group of leaders I'm discipling and we're going through these books. And I just watched you do this really intentional discipleship Can you talk about that? I mean, that's just so practical what you've done over the years.
It is super practical. It's probably the best thing I ever accidentally did. That, it just sort of was an idea about 15 years ago to say, we need some more leaders around here. At that time, our church did not have what we have today, which is a pretty developed leadership pipeline. We just kind of instinctively knew, gosh, we got to raise up some folk who could maybe one day be elders. We never announced it as an eldership pipeline, but we thought, well, let's make a small group. So I just put together, I got a couple of books. I use Greg Ogden's. He's a great author. He's got a book called Leadership Essentials. And it's just a fantastic book. I like it because it starts with character and it moves outward to practical skills like developing leaders and vision and strategy. But it starts with who you are. It's got some stuff on holiness and humility and all of that. And so we handpick some leaders from our church. And I ask other leaders in our church to give me the names of people and men, women, and we try to put a group together. Now it's about 20 people. It's men and women. It's diverse. It's old and young. And they're people that have developed, demonstrated some leadership in our church. And I just say, it's a handwritten, a personal invitation. Just say, would you like to hang out with me and a couple of the leaders from our church just to help us get better at leadership? It's 13 weeks long and it's a high bar. It's like, if you say yes, you're going to be here every week. We memorize scripture together. We work really, really hard for 13 weeks. And at the end of the time, there's this galvanized group who's like, the charge is go lead, and they're fired up and pumped up. And out of there, every elder we have on our team came out of that group at one point or another. So it has turned out to be a pretty cool pipeline for us. But that leadership, and if you want, I can copy in on the show notes or something, a kind of booklet that we use and all the resources there.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about all of our church multipliers, church starters, church planters that we have listening to this right now. So this is 13 weeks you're doing this. I've done groups, Ben, that lasted a whole year, met once a month, so similar meeting time, but and you're reading one book in those 13 weeks. Is that correct?
Well, I'll share the booklet with you because it's kind of hodgepodge. It's all over. We got one book that's the main source. That's the Greg Ogden Leadership Essentials. But then I'm pulling from all kinds of sources on it's a different topic every week. Holiness.
Okay.
Your family life, your disciplines. We do spiritual disciplines. We fast together. We memorize scripture together. Then it moves up into more practical stuff. And so I'm pulling from all sources, but there's probably a half hour to an hour of work and then a little more reading and some memorization every week. We serve together. We do a prayer experience together. And it's an intense run, but I'll tell you, they're bonded and they're like on fire for the mission. And I think everyone, no matter, even if you're just like I'm like solo staff, or I'm just got a couple of people in my church plant, I think the hardest part is it really wise to invest that much time in a handful of people when I've got all these immediate urgent needs in front of me? And I would say, if you stop and think about it, you realize it would be one of those categories of things that's important. It may never feel urgent. It will feel urgent one day when you realize, I wish I had 6 more leaders.
Yeah.
And the best time to plant that tree would have been, 5 years ago. So, so today's the second best day to plant that tree. And that is, I would just say, get started today with investing in whoever you want, because leaders don't, some of our leadership strategy in finding leaders is to find a leader or inherit one or, have someone send us one. But Jesus' method, and if you're a church planner and starting a church, you got to develop them. And it takes longer to develop a leader than it does to make a disciple sometimes. Someone can cross that line of faith, might take a year or two, but a leader, it might take 4 or 5 or 6 more before you feel like I can really entrust a lot here. So you got to start somewhere and let them come along.
Okay, so that's just gold, Ben. Thank you for that. I think for every leader, regardless of the size, if you, like you said, if you're just now starting off, getting ready to launch your church, or if you're leading a giga church right now or leading a business, that's just money in the bank to be investing intentionally that way with a plan. Now, the other thing I've watched with you is you raise up leaders and you say, okay, you know what, you can go out and be a church planter. Or I think about Ethan Magnus recently, who is this amazing church leader who's leading a great church in Tennessee right now. And he was on your staff for years. And talk about open-handedness and maybe some of the joys, the pains that come with that.
Yeah. The first time I came, probably most, the first time I remember encountering that, Greg, was when I had developed a youth ministry I was super proud of, and I didn't want to let go of it. I didn't want to develop leaders because I was having too much fun. And then I realized it was capped by how far I could reach. And I had a guy in the church come up to me and go, "Why are you hogging all of the ministry?" He's like a guy in the church, he's one of my leaders. I can't remember what job he had. He literally just said it to me. Why? And I never thought of it that way. And that's what I needed as a young leader. So that was the first time. It's like, that was one of the challenges, is to let go and to hold this thing loosely and realize, if I want it to be about me, it will be, and it will be as big as I can reach. But if we want it to be about the kingdom and a bunch of people we can't reach, then it's got to be about leadership development. That was the first time I encountered that. The second, Greg, was several years ago when we really felt called to plant a church as a congregation, and identified a place, one exit down the freeway, that was an awesome area. And for the first time, getting super excited about letting leaders go. Really, I went to David Robinson, who was a dearly beloved pastor and like a right arm to me, or senior associate, been with us for 13 years, and just said, "Man, I see something in you, man, and I know you're having a great time here. We could do this for years together, but we think you're supposed to do this. What do you think? Are you feeling that call?" He's like, "No." But it was that "I see something in you" conversation that we had there, that he'll tell you someone else saying, "I think there's more there," and then being willing to release, and then saying, "Whatever you want from here, you can take and make it go." And that was what he wanted and needed. And so we sent off 4 leaders, like our children's pastor, both of our youth pastors, and an administrator, and a bunch of our top givers, and 300 people went down the road and started a church that took off. And I just, here's what happened at our church at the time. I'm not saying this happens all the time, but God replaced those people pretty immediately at our church. There was such a buzz and an energy about mission that we were doing this, and we were raising up leaders and sending them out. People were going. Immediately God honored that and backfilled. I think there's an honor. I think God honors open-handedness with your leaders. When you're just willing to say, "You don't belong to me. You work on our staff. You don't belong here. To me, we want kingdom expansion." And the more you talk that and believe it, the more God honors it, and he'll send you more leaders. I really believe that.
Okay. So that just reminds me of the quote we talk about all the time. We're blessed for one reason and one reason only. And that's to be a blessing to others, right? So when God entrusts leaders to us, we always think about money usually in that, but when he entrusts talented, leadership gifted people to us, it's the same principle. It's how can we be a blessing to others and to God's kingdom. Ben, so you talked about, a leader that you went to and I said, "I see something in you." What about, how do you deal with the staff person that comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about," or "There's another church," and you've invested like years into their development. You have other plans for them, but now how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a real gut check for where your head and heart is, right? And that's happened, of course, many times over the years for me. You mentioned Ethan Magnus. Ethan and I worked together for a long time, 10 or 15 years. And that was the case. He came. I kind of knew it would happen because I just saw it in him, knew that was what he kind of would want to pursue. And he came, and I let out an expletive that I won't repeat on your podcast.
Thank you.
And I said, "This is really exciting, but oh shoot." And in fact, I'll tell you an example of what happened in that particular instance. He later came back and he said, I don't have peace about this. I don't think I'm supposed to go." And I just felt it in my spirit, like I was so sure that God was working on me to say, "Ben, your job is to do kingdom work, not guard your store and protect your flock and keep your team and make it easy for you," which, Ethan's the kind of guy you want on your team, man. It was pulling me up. But I felt so sure that I said to him, sometimes fear and lack of peace, feel exactly the same in my experience. So he was saying, I don't have any peace. And I said, you better be making sure that's not just you being afraid. And he cried and I cried, and he came back the next day and we bawled like babies and hugged each other's necks. And he says, I need to go do this. And I said, you're going to crush it. And and he is crushing it. And what that did for our church is when we stood up as brothers, arm in arm, and just, said, Ethan came and said, I think I'm supposed to go. And you could legitimately say, there's no story behind the story. No one's trying to get rid of anybody, but this is kingdom work. What that does is it creates a leadership, development, deployment, loose-handed culture that others can now begin to think, like, what is God preparing? And that's how we've always got to be thinking. What is God preparing me to do next? Leadership development is nothing but discipleship. It's just the next step. It's just another level of discipleship. And it's another level of going and sending. It's the culmination of it in many ways. So those are some great stories. You said, what, is it hard? Of course it's hard. It's like sending your kid off to college. You don't want to do it, but it's supposed to happen.
Okay, so we've got, I think back now, you're at a stage in your ministry where you've got a lot of experience. You've learned from lots of people. You've been through the highs and the lows. Think back to the time when to younger Ben Cachiaras, and I think back on it and I'm going, oh man, I wish I would have heard this talk all those years ago. What would you say to those guys and gals who are out there in church plant world specifically, or taking on a new leadership role in a local church, and they're really starting kind of from ground zero? What counsel would you give them from what you've learned?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Greg. I guess a few things come to mind right away. One is, just making it crystal clear early as possible. It's not about you. It's about the mission. And if it's the mission, then reproduce yourself as many times as you can. And just like always know who's your Timothy, who's your Paul, and who's your Barnabas, right? Who's that Timothy you're investing in? Who's your Paul who's pouring into you? Who's your Barnabas who's coming alongside you? And at every level of leadership you are at, you need to be having that. I guess that would be one thing. It's just like, it's not about you. It's always about development.
Well, let me just, before you jump into the other thing, it's so easy. I think back to my younger days and I go, I kind of want it to be all about me, right? And it's nice to be needed and wanted, and everybody circles around you.
Proving yourself. You feel like you can prove yourself. And especially like I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. So I love you to think I'm really good, and I achieve a lot. And so I want to do a lot. But once I realized, that, and honestly, what I've done is put my achievement less on what I can do, on just like how many leaders we can deploy and see where this thing goes. But yeah. So
that's good stuff. Yeah. And then the other thing is,
maybe unapologetically create an urgency about your mission, because that will do more to lure your best leaders out of the woodwork than anything. Nobody, your best leaders aren't going to be drawn by you making a staged announcement about needing more kids workers. Okay, you need kids workers, and good luck finding them, but the church will rise or fall on the leaders. Leadership's only one of the spiritual gifts. It just so happens it's the one that glues all the others together and gives you direction and momentum. So you need to develop leaders. And so I would say it's the urgency of the mission that will do more to pull leaders out than anything you do. If you're not on mission, if you're not launching a new campus, you don't need new leaders. If you're not launching a new church, you don't need new leaders. If you're not growing, you don't need new leaders. To maintain what you're doing in status quo, you'll never find, pour into, or have them surface. But if it's like, hey, we got a big problem. We got to go twice the size, or we got all these new people to reach, and I only got a little time to do it. Who's out here who will help us? Now your best leaders, something goes off in them, and they rise up and they go, now you're speaking my language. I'm not going to hand out a bulletin at the door, but you want me to help you solve a big problem? Now I'm in. So I think, I wish I would have been braver to say, instead of apologetically hat in hand, go to try to find a leader who was ready-made, that I would have just been bolder at saying, we've got a life or death mission. And I need people out here who are entrepreneurs and who are leaders in your line of work or whatever. God's dialed you up that way. get on board and giving them more ways to do it earlier. We do that, I think, decent now, but it took me a long time to get there. I would say that I wish I would have figured out sooner.
That's just genius. And the other thing, Ben, in there is that we may look at somebody that's a high capacity leader in whatever their field is, and we're going, oh man, they're so busy, they're not going to have time to do this. But what you and I have discovered is, no, leaders make time for what's important to them. And if you cast an urgent vision to them and how they can actually make a difference in the kingdom, they'll join you on the journey, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Greg, I guess the only other thing I would say there is celebrate it really well early. Like, make it one of your absolute high. So one thing we do is, what you celebrate, you duplicate. Every staff meeting we have, we celebrate a few key numbers, like baptisms, number of new people that came through our church, and number of leaders. And we put the names on the screen. We have a little video of one of them. And it's like, we don't make heroes out of people who work the hardest or get the most work done. We make heroes out of the people who make the most leaders. The hero makers are the heroes, right? And so I think that's another thing I guess I wish I'd figured out sooner, is to celebrate it really, really strongly early on. And that way you build this, like, we call it a teaching hospital, where everything we do is like everyone's got an apprentice by their side pouring in, and you're going to be celebrated if you do that, not if you get a lot done. But if you raise up a leader, find one, it's like everyone cheers. And that's a culture that, people don't have a leadership development problem. We have a leadership culture problem. Like, if we haven't baked it in yet, like, this is what the win looks like. So yeah, those are some things that come to mind.
Those are fantastic. Okay, Ben, we were together just recently, a few weeks ago, just for soul care, for each other's soul care with a couple other buddies. And I still laugh about this. We're talking about you're thinking about adding another service on the weekend. And I said, well, when are you going to do this? And you said, well, I think like in 2 weeks. And I said, well, does everybody know that? And you're like going, well, no, it's going to create like an oh crap moment in our staff. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. You mean like you're going to do this 2 months out? And you're going, no, like in 2 weeks. Okay. The only way that works is if leadership development's in place. Talk about that and the moment that you created there.
Yes. Yeah. And they did talk me down, and we compromised. It was not 2 weeks, but nor was it 2 months. And we start this weekend with it. So that's
4 weeks. 4 weeks. Okay.
They talked me down to reality there, but it didn't take us 2 months to put together. So it's two things, Greg. It's A, you've got to have some leaders in the ready. You've got to be pregnant before you can birth something. And so you've got to have some stuff in the cannon ready to fire. And so there was this sense that we do have that readiness of people to deploy. You can't always step out and make a big leap if you haven't been sort of developing leaders. You can't give birth if you're not pregnant. The other thing is, though, it's quite deliberate to sometimes a leader's job. If you want to maintain momentum, you have bigger goals. That's the only way momentum is maintained. You've got to have a new target. And so for us, we call them uh-ohs. And it's like, if you want to raise up new leaders, there's nothing that will do it better than saying, well, we have a new service to launch in 4 weeks. We do. That means somehow we've got to find 6 new people at the 9 o'clock service to hold babies, 6 new people to work with preschools, 7 new people to work. You go right down the list. It's like just your Sunday morning stuff. It's like, we're going to need this many leaders. And so there's an uh-oh. It's like that actually creates how are we going to develop these leaders or find them? And the more you do that, the more people know there's an uh-oh coming, because God's on the move. We got to catch up to what the Holy Spirit's doing. And they're going to say, we got to grow. So I've got to be developing this cache of leaders always. So it's a culture that you develop over time.
Ben, I just was getting lost there a minute, because you and I have written so many teaching series together. We need to do an book or sermon series, right? Of moments in the Bible where God said, oh, by the way, Moses, oh, by the way, Elijah, oh, by the way, disciples. And the disciples are going, that'd be a great teaching. And what a great way to develop your congregation, right? Is to teach through those kind of moments.
It changes the whole conversation, Greg, from like this vague notion we all approve of that we probably should get some leaders someday to a time-bound, I must now have a process and a date by which I will have, 3 new student leaders identified. And that means I start looking at people differently, like not, will you be here Wednesday to work, but could you lead this team? It's like, it just changes everything about it. We all need that little shove that the gives us. It gives us the urgency and the importance to see people we would not see as potential leaders, to be able to say, they're 80%, but let's go anyway. That's what Jesus did. He certainly didn't get perfection. So I love it. Okay, you write it, and I'll put my name on it. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, man. Okay. So, we're at the end of our time. Thank you, my friend, for being on the Church Planting Podcast.
Hey, it's been an honor, Greg. God bless you and the people listening to this.